Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos a este nuevo evento, ¿no? De la serie que tenemos sobre la adquisición de la segunda lengua y por qué es tan difícil o parece tan difícil. Welcome to the Instituto Cervantes in Leeds and Manchester. I am Pedro Eusebio, the director. And tonight we have a new event of a series that focuses on the learning of a foreign language and the challenge, but also, and we had to stress that the great satisfaction that it brings. The series, Acquiring a Second Language, why do we find it so difficult? Is a forum that is aimed at parents, students, language students, and the general public, which will consider how we learn a second language and the heritage language. The participants, today is the third event, had been discussing various elements and difficulties that come with the second language acquisition, including, among others, the theme, the myth that will be analyzed today with Carmen Muñoz. Thank you, Carmen, for being with us tonight, and Idoia, of course. Myths and realities surrounding language acquisition and age. It's not nothing that we have not been spoken about. How is this a common idea that is, as older we are, the harder it becomes to learn a new languages. But we have very good examples and also analysis and data that proves just the contrary. The Instituto Cervantes is a good example of that, because we could say that nearly half of our students, they are over 50, and they learn Spanish and they are fluent in Spanish after some time studying at the Instituto. So apart from these challenges and the satisfaction, but there's another aspect that is the end of the series, but also the series that we have at the moment about bilingualism, how important is to learn a new language, because it's not only the fact that we learn a language that maybe had practical aspects from our profession, our job, but also how change our lives and how it opens a wide windows to different cultures, different mentalities, and also to the diversity, which is so important in our society. So I would like to thank you to all of you for being with us. I would like to thank the coordinators, Anna Oskoz, who cannot today will be with us, and Idoia, Elola, who are coordinating the series, and of course, Professor Carmen Muñoz from the University of Barcelona. First of all, I will introduce Idoia and Anna, and then Idoia will introduce our special guest tonight. Idoia Elola is professor of the Department of Classical and Modern Languages and Literatures, where she teaches Spanish, applied linguistics, and second language studies. She's also the academic director of the Spanish program at the TESAC Tech University campus in Sevilla, Spain. Recently, she was recognized as the TESAC Tech Integrated Scholar and was an Office of International Affairs Global Vision Award winner for the Donald H. Harragan Study Abroad Award in 2017. She is also co-editor of the journal System. Dr. Anna Oskoz is professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where she teaches courses in Spanish and second languages acquisition. She is currently the chair of the Modern Languages, Linguistics, and Intercultural Communication Department, and is also the co-editor of Calico Journal. And Carmen Muñoz will be introduced, who is a professor from the Applied Linguistics at the University of Barcelona. Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. Y ya hemos anunciado que aquellos que deseen pueden seguir la conversación en inglés o en español, como deseen, simplemente pulsar en el icono que está abajo en su pantalla. Muchísimas gracias, Idoia, tienes la palabra.
Muchas gracias. Well, good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Anna, as Pedro mentioned, couldn't be here today, but she sent me regards. The two of us would like to thank the Instituto Cervantes, Manchester and Leeds, again, for inviting us to coordinate this series, and also to the audience for attending this talk. Our third speaker of the series is Carmen Muñoz, professor in the English Studies Department at the University of Barcelona, where she currently holds an ICREA academia position. Her research interests include second and foreign language acquisition, age and individual differences in second language learning, young learners, and multilingualism. In conjunction with the Language Acquisition Research Group, GRAL, Carmen is currently involved in research that examines the potential of in and out of school exposure for learning English as a foreign language, and that explores the role of age, input, and aptitude in second language learning. She has received several awards, including the ICREA Award in 2010 and the Eurosla Distinguished Scholar Award in 2016. Because of the quality of her research, she has numerous projects funded nationally and internationally, as well as she's been published nationally, internationally. So besides her renowned presence, that I think that is obvious from what I've just said, there are several reasons why we invited Carmen to this series. The first one is, at least for us, it's not for us, it's for everybody, it's her magnificent research on age. No doubt she has moved the field forward, and because of her, we have a better sense of what learners of different ages can achieve in second language acquisition. A second reason is that she's interested in the 4 skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. This is not common among many of second language acquisition researchers who tend to concentrate on 1 and maybe 2 skills. And another very important reason why we invited Carmen is that she has been a role model for Anna and for me. In our classes, and we didn't know this before this talk, Carmen, but we realized that Carmen and I, we ask our students, our graduate students, to read her engaging articles because of the clarity of their content and their well-structured format. In fact, we use Carmen's articles as models of good research manuscripts. But more importantly, is that, and we have seen this with our students, Carmen's articles truly empower our students and motivating them to begin their own research. So that has been incredible to watch, Carmen. And without further ado, I introduce you to Carmen Muñoz.
No tengo palabras. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Idoia, for this very, very kind introduction. I wasn't expecting this. Thanks to you for organizing, you and Anna for organizing this talk, to the Instituto Cervantes in Manchester, and to everybody who's helped organizing this talk. My talk is about age and the relationship between age and language learning. And age is a factor, a variable that almost everybody has an opinion about. Yeah? That's the thing about age. And my task today, my aim today, is to argue that some of these ideas that people hold about age are just false beliefs. We can call them misconceptions. I've called them myths in this presentation. So I'm going to be talking about 4 of these myths, 4 of these misconceptions, and I'm going to contrast them with facts. And I understand facts here as findings from studies, findings from research evidence. So I'm going to begin with babies. It is a common idea among some people, and also it has been used to advertise language teaching programs for, private schools, etc., that you need to learn a second language as if you were a baby, right? That's the ideal, because it is so easy to learn a language when you're a baby, right? That's the idea. However, we have a main difference here, which is age, right? Learners of the first language, mother tongue learners, are babies, and they need language to survive. Yeah? They need language to be able to express that they are hungry, that they have pain, that they are sleepy. They need language, they need to learn language in order to communicate with the family, to socialize in the family, to socialize in society. Also, they begin from scratch, right? Children do not come with a previous language. They discover language at the same time as they discover the world. They develop concepts and label them, right, at the same time. They realize that that object, that thing in the kitchen with 4 legs, which is brown and big, is called table the same way as the other object in the living room, which is small and it's green, and it's also called table, right? So they learn these labels for these concepts. And they learn language without awareness while they are communicating, while they are living, right? That's what they are doing. On the other side, second language learners, of course, are older. And older people have other needs and other priorities. Learning a language is not a matter of survival, usually. And very importantly, we already have a language, our first language, or more languages, right? When we learn a language, it can be our 3rd language, our 4th language. And it is not that we have different boxes in the brain where we keep the different languages, one for English, one for Spanish, one for French, right? The different languages that we know and that we are learning and that we process have all these multiple interrelations, and we cannot prevent that there is an influence between languages, for good and for bad, yeah? And finally, as distinct from babies, we are aware usually that we learn a language. We usually intend to learn a language. After this introduction, I move on to the main myth here, and I think almost everybody will be able to complete this sentence because we've heard it so much, yeah? Children are like sponges. Yeah? This is the metaphor that people use to explain that children may have this great ability to learn languages. However, again, here we have 2 different kids. We have a toddler now playing with, again, with the family, right? With building blocks. They are using language to play. They are using language to bond, to be together. Probably this toddler is absorbing, as if she was a sponge. She's absorbing the language. But look at the poor kid on the right. Yeah, that's a bit of an exaggeration, right? But kids at the school don't have the same learning environment. They don't have the language they can absorb. So what we see is that when children learn the first language, they learn it differently from when they learn it at school. Yeah, they learn it, we call it implicitly, unaware, unconsciously, without effort. Right? They are not making efforts like the other kids with the books. We also say that they learn it incidentally, meaning that they learn it while doing something else, while they are listening to the mother reading a picture book, while they are using the building blocks for the play, for the game. In that situation, it's when we could have a sponge that is soaking wet, but only in that situation, yeah? Because in other situations, when there is not so much language around, sponges are dry, right? They cannot soak the water. And what we know is that to absorb the language, to learn implicitly in this way, we need massive contact with the language. If you care to calculate how many hours a 3-year-old has been in contact with the language, right? Has been awake, let's say, it amounts to more than 10,000, 11,000 hours, right? In a natural context, in the family. Now compare that to what standard school children have at the school. if they are lucky, I'm not talking of bilingual schools or immersion schools, right? If they are lucky, in some countries, they may get as many as 2,000 hours until the age of 17, right, in school. When there is not this unlimited exposure to the language, what happens is that learners do not encounter words with enough frequency to match the form they hear, table with the meaning, and to consolidate them in memory. The same with grammar. They don't encounter patterns, how words are positioned in the sentence, what affixes they have, what is the function with respect to each other. If they don't encounter those patterns with enough frequency, they cannot extract those grammatical regularities and learn the grammar implicitly. So what the conclusion for this part is that if there is no water to soak, and if we are referring to just, as I said, regular schools, limited input, in those type of situations, in those types of contexts, children cannot absorb the language, right? So if we are talking of school children, we cannot say that children are like sponges absorbing the language, that we can begin very early on because they are going to absorb the language painlessly. Now I move to the third myth. You may have heard, I'm sure, about the critical period hypothesis. And the myth that language learning after puberty is unsuccessful is based on this hypothesis. The hypothesis says that there is a period in life in which learning a language is easier, not just easier, but also that you can become native-like. Yeah? And there is not much evidence for this, fortunately, but the evidence that there exists, or some of it, comes from cases of feral children. You may have seen the film by François Truffaut. Victor was found in the forest, and they thought he may have been 9 years old. He didn't have language, and he could never learn language, and he could never learn really to be human-like. The case of Ginny is more recent, and she was found in California at the end of the 20th century. She was found locked in her room in her house in social isolation all her life. She was not allowed to make any sounds. She had not learned any language, but not just language. Look at the picture here, right? She had not acquired any physical abilities. Look at her position. She had never been playing outside. She had never run. She had never done any exercise. The story of Ginny, which is very sad because, again, she went through traumatic experiences of many types, had not a happy ending. What researchers in second language acquisition then tried to do was to provide evidence for the critical period hypothesis coming from second language learners, right? Because with first language learners, you cannot have experiments. You cannot lock them in rooms. You cannot prevent them from learning language, right? We call this the forbidden experiment. However, with second language learners, you can do studies without this cruelty, just by comparing the age at which people have arrived in the foreign language country, in the foreign language setting. Many studies, many have been conducted to try and confirm that there exists a critical period for second language learning, and that boundary has been usually established at puberty. These three diagrams here, this shows the variety of findings of these studies. Yeah, there has not. We talk about mixed findings, right? When there is not something that is robust enough, that is convincing. If we look at the first diagram, what we see is after birth, a very rapid decrease and then a plateau. The second type illustrates studies that have found a sort of a plateau, which was positive, right? Native-like or almost native-like, and a decrease at puberty. And the third pattern, also found in other studies, where you have a good 7 first years, then a rapid decrease until puberty, and then a plateau. What this studies taught us was that we could make a difference between results in the short term, which cannot be read here, I'm sorry, and in the long term, right? Those are studies that compared different individuals who had arrived when they were children, when they were very young children, older children, adults, have shown that if those studies are conducted, let's say, after a few months or a couple of years in the country, what they find is that older children and adults have reached a higher level of proficiency, right? So we can say that they are more efficient learners. Whereas when you test these people again, or other people, after, let's say, 10 years in the country, what has been found is that those who arrived when they were very young, right, the younger children group, have caught up with the others and have surpassed the others. And sometimes they even may reach a native speaker level. Now, what happened then was that these findings for immersion context were generalized to school context. And that's when in the field and outside the field, the idea was developed that children need to start learning a language very early on. But we didn't have evidence from school context, and I'm talking of the end of the 20th century, neither in the short term, not in the long term. So we needed to find evidence for that, and that's when my colleagues and myself started this big project we called the Barcelona Age Factor Project, which took us like 8 or 10 years because we wanted to follow these learners longitudinally. And we had 4 groups of learners, those who started at the age of 8, those who started at the age of 11, of 14, and 18, or plus 18. And we tested them, we examined them with English tests of all sorts, written and oral, all skills. After 200 hours of tuition, after 416 hours a second time, and after 726 hours a third time. This is what it looked like, but I won't bother you with all this. But groups A and B were the central groups in our investigation because our findings could have relevance for the school system to the question as to when to start learning a foreign language. I could summarize the results of this 8-10 years of a study in just one slide. Adults did better than adolescents. Adolescents did better than older learners, older children, and older children did better than younger children. But remember that in our design, they just all had the same number of class hours of tuition, yeah? And with this, we could see that all the learners are more efficient. With the same amount of time, they could learn more. The differences were especially high in those tests that were more cognitively complex, for example, grammar. Yeah? And differences were not that high for tests like listening comprehension or pronunciation. Yeah? And we also found that when the A and B groups reach similar cognitive levels at the age of almost 18, then differences also diminished. And we wrote a beautiful book with plans about our results. The book was published in 2006. And here I'm presenting just a few other studies that found very much the same in different contexts at different points in time. The first one was a study that took place also in Spain, in the Basque Country, slightly smaller, finding the same. Then we have Switzerland, we have England, we had a study on French as a foreign language, we had Japan, Denmark, the Netherlands, and these days we have a few studies coming from Germany, because Germany has only recently moved the starting age at the school down. Yeah, for I don't know what reasons, the Spanish government was very quick at making these changes that also the European Union has advocated, right? So when we started our investigation, it was the point at which we had children following the old system beginning at 11 and children starting with the new system beginning at 8. And very quick, then after a couple of years, they also started at the age of 6, and that's what we have now. Again, what was that's somehow what we've learned after this study, after these 10 years, that there are different advantages for different age groups. For the younger, if they have enough and massive, and enough means massive amounts of input, then they can learn implicitly, and of course, implicit learning is better. Yeah? But all the learners may not be so good at implicit learning, but they are much better at explicit learning, right? They are much better at memorizing vocabulary. They are much better at understanding grammar because of their intellectual development, right? And explicit learning is much faster than implicit learning. And it is the type of learning that is favored in the classroom. So this explains that our older learners, right, all the children compared with the young children, the adolescents compared with the older children, and the adults compared with the other groups, learned faster with the same amount of time. I was surprised. I don't know, maybe we shouldn't have done this for 10 years of our life. If we look at what a young adult may do, going to the Cervantes, to a good language school, after 1 year, 1 year and a half, they may reach an A1 level in the foreign language. Right? 1 2 years, you can reach an A1 level. What we have in schools, for example, in this country and in other countries, children begin at the age of 6. Very often in kindergarten, they already have hours of English. And at the end of primary, after 6 years, not many go beyond A1 level, right? So we can see this efficiency just, you know, without doing a big research. As I said, the third comparison was after 726 hours. That is like long time if you want, but I mean, it was spread over many years, but not many hours. So we had still the question that we needed to answer, which was what happens in the longer term, not just 700 hours, but more hours. And we did a second bigger study, not with 2,000, but with some 100 students at university. And they needed to have had at least 14 years of language learning. Again, English was the language that they learned. And we again had many, many tests on all different abilities. And we had a questionnaire and an individual interview, a one-on-one interview. So we were interested to know what they had done with the language over all those years and what they were doing with the language nowadays. So we asked them about whether they had studied abroad, whether they had spent some time abroad, whether they watch TV programs, internet in English, whether they had friends with whom they spoke English speaker friends, whether they were gamers and they played with gamers all over the world and used English as the lingua franca, whether they had followed private tuition or extra tuition besides the school. And of course, we asked them about when they started learning English. The first result was very clear. Starting age did not have any effect on their English proficiency at the age of, average was 21. What had an effect is, and you don't need to read everything, just look at the column in the middle. Yeah, we had a set of input measures, how we measured the contact they had had with English, how many hours they had spent abroad in an English-speaking environment. What was the frequency of their current contact like? How many years of instruction, hours of curricula, extracurricular instruction, etc. And all these variables were seen to have an effect, a statistical effect on the different measures we had of proficiency and also oral performance, right? So all these input measures mattered, and age had not mattered, also in the long term. So what seems to matter is not so much the starting age, but what you do with the language, right? That was the lesson from this second study. From the interviews, we also learned something else. We asked them if there had been a turning point in their language learning journey. Had there been a moment, had there been a point in which, you know, they said they felt it was different, they were really acquiring the language. And out of 181 interviews, 181 interviewees, more than 80% identified a turning point in their, as I said, language learning trajectory in an input-intensive context. So here I have two quotes, two real quotes from two young women. First one told us, when I felt I started to stack up and really not learning more here in Spain, I moved to Dublin and I spent there like a couple of months or so. That did it. The other girl, although I never got to live in an English-speaking country, I'm always relating to English-speaking people. And that makes such a big difference. And I also dated a Canadian for a year. We call this the boyfriend factor, which is also very important. Okay, so now I move to the fourth and last myth, which I hope I've been leading you to it. Age is an important factor, but it's not the only or the most important determinant of second language success, right? It's only one of many factors. That's the problem and the beauty of second language acquisition. There are so many factors that affect how each one of us learns a language, how successful we are, how fast we are. We are all different individuals, and internal factors affect how we learn, how successful we are. Things like motivation, and motivation is dynamic. I may be more motivated to learn the language today than yesterday or than last year. I may be more motivated for French than for Russian, right? Motivation explains that we can make efforts to learn the language. Cognitive abilities, we don't all have the same memory, for example. Language aptitude, which is a special talent for learning a language. Again, some people have it and some people have it very big and some people have it very small, right? We all can learn languages, but if we have lots of language aptitude, we'll be faster than those that have less language aptitude. External factors, where we learn, quality of instruction, the exposure, the contact we have outside school with the language. And now here comes a line that I don't like to include, but I need to include: socioeconomic and sociocultural status. Absolutely every study that has included things like parents' educational level in primary school has found that this is one of the most important determinants of success in foreign language learning. And then another one, which we don't talk so much about, which is language distance, and which I want to argue it's very important and explains the results of these surveys, for example, that they do at the level of Europe. Yeah. And they find that the Dutch have very good English and the Swedish have very good English, and Spanish people have not such good English, or French people have not such good English, or Italian people have not such good English. And in those surveys, they never analyze language distance with English, never. So I have done several studies as well, where, like the ones I talked before, we've seen other factors trumping age, and I'm talking of language distance here, one of them. This is a study we conducted with my colleague Teresa Cadierno in Denmark, where we compared 7-year-old kids in Denmark and in Spain. They were bilingual, Spanish, Catalan, and we looked at their vocabulary recognition, English vocabulary recognition, right? The test of receptive skills vocabulary. The green columns represent the number of hours of instruction they had had in English. We got the Danish kids after 13 hours. It was at the end of September, the first month ever, the first term ever, that they were studying English. The Spanish kids had almost 300 hours of English. Now look at the blue columns. This is the results in the test. Can you see any significant difference? It even looks like the Danish is slightly higher than the Spanish. And the same with the 9-year-olds. Yeah? Exactly the same. They were also beginning at the school. The green columns represent the number of hours. In this case, the 9-year-olds had a bit more than 500 hours compared to 13 hours. And look at the blue columns, vocabulary in English, the same, no difference. Of course, here we are talking of language distance between Danish and English and Spanish, Catalan and English, but we are also talking of exposure to the language, because English is very much a second language. It's a language that you encounter all around in Denmark. Everybody speaks English and many activities are conducted in English. Television is not dubbed. So there is a daily contact, yeah, for these kids with English. This is another study. This is wider. We had 7 European countries participating, and we had questionnaires answered by parents of 865 kids. We had kids from here, from Croatia, from the Netherlands, from England. They were learning French and Spanish, from Italy, from Poland, from Sweden. Again, starting age did not have an influence. The Swedish kids started 2 years after the Spanish kids, but of course they had higher receptive skills. Here we look both at reading and listening skills. The variables, the factors that were more important, of course, linguistic distance. The Swedish and Dutch kids were at the top of the marks. Out of school exposure, and here we also had the Croatians occupying the 3rd place, because again, the Croatian kids were very much in contact with English every day. And we also had the parents' knowledge of the foreign language and their active use of the foreign language as an influential variable. When we also wanted to explore the types of exposure to the foreign language they had, this is what we saw. Of course, there was more listening than anything, but that included listening to music, which doesn't mean that everybody is aware of that. And out of these different activities, watching television or programs in the foreign language and internet was the type of out of school exposure that had a higher influence on their reading comprehension skills and their listening comprehension skills. So I'm finishing. These are the 4 myths I have talked about. I've tried to argue that learning a second language is not like learning your mother tongue, that children are not always sponges, that they need to have water to suck, that learning a second language after puberty is not unsuccessful, and that age is only one important determinant of second language success, but it's not the only one. If we have to replace those myths with facts, first of all, age does not make miracles. Age may be young learners, young kids may be successful at learning a language if they have massive amounts of exposure, immersion in society, immersion in a school. If the quality of the input is good, if there is continuity, because not always there is continuity in learning a language, and as our Canadian colleagues have shown us, if we had to choose between intensity and earliness, we should choose intensity, right? It is better, as the Canadian studies have shown, to begin at the age of 11 with a very intensive program than begin at the age of 6 with a very spread out program of only 60 minutes per week, for example. Yeah. Also, that second language learning is more a question of time than a question of age, and that's the final one. Language learning should be considered lifelong learning, right? And we know that we can learn a language at any age, that all ages will have different advantages, that learning will be different at different ages, but it can always be an enjoyable and a very enriching experience. And that's all from me. If you have any comments, questions, I'd be very happy to talk to you.
Well, Carmen, thank you for a very interesting talk and for breaking the myths, you know, because if myths are actually leading the curriculum in many countries. So this is an important topic that we should be discussing, and we hardly ever do it, especially when you hear parents being so happy that their kids are learning a foreign language and not thinking about whether those kids are really learning the language or not. So I would let other people ask any questions that you might have.
I would like to put a question.
Okay.
First of all, really fantastic how such a so complicated topic can be so easily and clear to be explained. I am really impressed. It's really fantastic. And this is related to my comment and question. Why don't we explain that to the children and to the people who learn a language for the first time? Because all those media you have so brilliantly explained is that all we have in our minds. We always thought that when you become older, you have very real difficulties, that the children learn automatically a foreign language. So the question is why? Have you got any experience where in the schools or even to the teachers, those facts are explained or not really?
This is a very complicated, because there are political issues here. Yeah, it's educational authorities that make decisions, and it's not so much researchers that make decisions. So I think the country where researchers and educational authorities have been working together better is Canada. And there, because of the, for example, in Quebec, because of the immersion and the bilingualism in the country, etc., they have tried different recipes, different formulas. And our colleagues, Patsy Lightbound and Nina Spada and many others have been very active there. And they have shown, they have been able to compare, as I was saying now at the end. If you give an 11-year-old half a year of all mornings in English, which they did, and then in the after, if you arrange the curriculum differently, what they did, right? They did up to grade 5, they studied a lot, they did all the subjects, and then in grade 6, which is a great moment, 11-year-olds, because they are mature enough, but they are not too old, yeah, and they are not too shy, because that is also a problem that maybe adolescents have, etc. And they had these programs where they had intensive English in the mornings, a term or 6 months or the whole year, and then they compared them with those kids who had the same number of hours but spread out up till university, and they did so much better because they could use the language. Because when you are in an intensive situation where you process the language, you are into the language, or the language is into you, yeah, and it's so much easier then. And in Canada, different ministers have promised to make changes and change the starting age, but they've never done it. So, and there is also this idea, from Europe, as I was saying before, the European Union saying that it's good that all European citizens have at least 3 languages. So it's good to begin early. Yes, you begin early, then you have many more years. You can add a 3rd language in secondary school, etc., which may be convenient. So that's there are many factors that educational authorities take into account when making their decisions. I don't know.
We have a question here. Is there evidence of adults achieving a high level of language proficiency through incidental learning alone?
Incidental learning alone would be like immersion in
no classes.
No classes. I mean, often in studies we have, I'm thinking not just one study, but there are participants in studies that have never learned the language formally, right? Like immigrants, for example, who start working on day one, and they may not register for courses, etc. So those would be maybe the people. I don't know if this person is talking about that. And yes, they learn the language, but then it also depends on the richness of the environment, right? The job this person has, because if it is a job that where this person is engaged in interaction with other people, then they are going to learn more language than if they are not using the language for work. So it very much depends on the circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Another question is, does shorter implicit inputs on a consistent and regular basis prove more effective than longer lessons with bigger gaps in between work better in L2 acquisition?
I think I think this refers to what I was talking about before. Yes. There are studies. I mean, it's a bit controversial because we found not very clear findings always, but it looks like intensive language learning when compared to regular programs works better. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ariana says, here in the US, L2 instruction is not always available in public schools before age 11. Instruction before age 11 is rare. Your findings give some measure of comfort to parents here who would like to see earlier L2 instruction, but conversely, how do you recommend that parents and educators in the US advocate for earlier L2 instruction?
Yeah, I would advocate for good quality L2 instruction whenever it comes and whenever it is possible. I mean, what happens in the States also with the dual programs, if I were a mother who had children in the United States and wanted my children, which I would, to learn another language, I would register them in schools that are bilingual, that are dual, because there is the richness of all the other people, of all the other children. They can learn from those children. And if this is earlier, because they are going to be talking with and playing and studying with these other kids, that would be fine. Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem there. But if, as I say, if I was given a country, or if I was given a school for myself, I would do whenever possible intensive program. Right? If it was at the age of 11, I would be happy, but I would do it intensively.
There is one more question here. I wondered about the use of the target language in secondary school classrooms. Is this artificial, and is it worth doing? Joanne.
The teacher can make it not to be artificial. Yeah. If you use authentic materials, if you base your language teaching on real tasks, or tasks that emulate things that people do with the language, then it doesn't need to be artificial. I mean, it's not native-like, but it's not artificial. And it'll contain mistakes, but it's okay. There's no problem there.
Well, Angela says Carmen deserves a whole country for herself. Thanks for this session. That will definitely change the way we teach. There are more people thanking you for being so accurately presenting all the myths. There is a lot of congratulations. There is something that you've talked while I'm waiting for some other question here. There is this sense that if people don't reach native-like language. You know, if you are not, don't sound like a native, then you are not good at languages. And so the other myth is, what does it mean to be bilingual? What are the degrees of bilingualism that should be acceptable and people should feel proud of what they have attained?
Absolutely, you've said it already. But I have this problem with my students at the university. Every year, the first day I ask them, they are Catalan Spanish bilingual, and they have a C1 at least in English. So I ask them, what are you? Are you bilingual? Are you trilingual? What are you? Oh, well, yeah, maybe we are bilingual, but not trilingual, not with English. And they have a C1. I said, what you are trilingual. And then we look at the definitions of bilingualism. And again, that's a perfect myth, to discuss. What is a bilingual? A bilingual is not two monolinguals. A bilingual is a person that has competence in two languages, and then the competence may vary. It may be very high in reading, not so high in speaking, etc. But of course, we have to be, as you said, we have to be very proud of our bilingual skills. Yes.
But maybe in the next talk you should
every year
one.
my students. And I'm not sure at the end of, I mean, these beliefs are so entrenched. They really are. And
I've seen it in second language students, but I've also seen it with heritage language students, and that's probably where we've done a lot of good work, I hope. But there's another question. Immersion intensive learning, spot on. How do we seriously expect our learners in the UK to thrive in language learning on minimal contact time?
Yeah, it's very difficult. Yeah, I know the situation in the UK. Yeah. And there are groups of teachers really making big effort with the very little time they have. And there's discontinuity sometimes, in the UK. I think it's not an easy situation they have. I suppose if I were there, I would try to motivate them to learn, and I would try to motivate them to learn outside the class. And this is one of my more recent interests, to see how people learn outside the school. And we can watch, if the teachers can motivate the children to watch cartoons in Spanish or in French at home, that can help so much, not just for the learning that they do while watching, but the motivation they get to continue with the language. I suppose that's something I would do.
You have more questions here. Thank you. Is there no age limit here? Given that all other circumstances and factors were alike, like the kind of exposure, socioeconomic status, etc., and that the only difference between two individuals would be the age, like, for example, 20 years old and 50 years old, would we expect the language learning be the same?
No, I think there are, and research says there are times in one's life when like I've mentioned age 11, right? 11, 12, this older children age seems to be very good. And when we look at the very old age, right? And I've seen a few comments in the chat referring to older people. Of course, older people and very old people can learn and are learning the language more and more, right? Retired people here in my city, language schools are getting, I don't know, a high percentage, a very, very high percentage these days of people who have retired and now they have the time to do English usually, and they are learning, right? It's true that There are things that are not so easy. They need more time. Again, it's a question of time, yeah, for all of us. They need more time because their memory is not so strong, for example. But again, we have huge individual differences, right? People that, again, I mean, being 70, it's not the same for everybody. Yeah? So yeah, generally speaking, they'll take slower. They'll be slower, they'll take more time. They may have also lost some auditory acuity, so they would need some reinforcement there, etc. But you know, there are things that are doable. Question of time, mostly.
All right, so we have a teaching moment, I think. For those who teach and are faced with the more artificial tasks, or who are faced with delivering curriculum texts and literature as a priority over actually teaching the target language itself, how can we encourage L2 language learning explicitly? Is there one way that is best to incorporate this, such as dual coding or discussion using the target language? It's Abby.
Courses on language and literature in the foreign language.
Let me see if I read it correctly. Maybe Abby can speak up and tell us exactly.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Abby.
I'm just thinking more along the lines of, like, especially in secondary school and like colleges, you're very like restricted to the topic that you are teaching. So for me, it is English, but it's very literature heavy. And obviously with the different circumstances in people's lives, we are seeing a massive influx of English as an additional language students coming in at varying ages, especially throughout adult learning, throughout adolescent learning. And a lot of the time, because of the restraints on your course, you're expected to deliver that content where it's very literature based, and they're expected to analyze that before they have the chance to actually grasp the language to use it in that way. I was just wondering if there was one particular way that you think would make it more accessible to them in terms of actually understanding the language itself and being able to use it before we ask them to analyze it.
Thank you for your question, but you're asking a lot. I suppose I've never been in that context, and I've never faced that problem. I've never thought about that before. But what occurred to me while I was listening to you is that I would do a language lesson before, like look at the book that they need to read, or if they need to read a book, that can be a lot, but see what type of vocabulary is central in that book, what type of structures that writer uses, etc. Right? So do that task yourself, and then prepare language lessons to prepare for them to learn this vocabulary, to work on those semantic fields, etc., before reading the book. So that would give them some preparation, and then of course guide them through the reading. But that's difficult, yeah.
We have a question
Thank
from
you.
Pablo, and thank you, Abby, for speaking. You have highlighted the importance of exposure time to L2. Most students don't have time to go to class more than once or twice a week. What do you recommend for adult learners to learn outside of class? Are there strategies more effective than others?
It depends on, when you ask learners, they tell you all these different strategies. But we are very much here, we are very much into Netflix. And when I ask my student, Netflix for one part of the students, but others are, in fandom communities, but these are all young people. And some are into YouTubes where they learn how to make up and things like that, right? But there is so much material in internet that can be enjoyable. So if they don't have the time and they have some time for leisure, they do whatever that activity is in the language they are learning. Yeah? Be it, whatever, Spanish, if it's Spanish, so you watch programs in Spanish, you are in fandom communities in Spanish, and then you use this little time you have for leisure in the language, and that's very effective. That's very effective. We are looking at our students these days, and they confess the percentage of their learning of English that comes from outside classes, which is very, very, very high.
Joanne mentions here, has there been studies on the productive skills? I know that receptive skills are higher in multilingual children. Just wondering if you could direct me to any production stories.
I don't understand.
Yeah, because productive can be writing, and your studies also include writing and speaking. So
we have used both. We have analyzed both writings and speaking and oral and receptive, productive. So what I said holds for all skills. For like when talking about language distance, it's very clear that for those Dutch kids or Danish kids, understanding English because of cognates with English is so easy. So first is reception, identifying, but then we saw how they somehow appropriated those words and used them productively. So production is also made easier because of the easiness of recognizing, right, of receptive skills. But I don't know if that's what the question was about.
Yes,
but
it was.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you. Thank you. It was. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
There is this beautiful back and forth with the literature, and so you've started a nice conversation here among some people.
Okay,
I don't think there is any questions actually right there, but I was going to ask you. It seems like I wonder when you're talking about being at least 11 years old to be able to have these intensive courses, how much literacy helps those students? Because when they are younger, the literacy skills are not as formed, I would say, as when they are 11. Could that be one of the reasons also that those type of students can actually accommodate to that intensity and be able to develop the language at a higher level?
Sure, literacy comes with cognitive maturity. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Also the type of activities they can do, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just communication, oral communication, but sure, it plays a role.
I also like the idea that you've always worked with bilingual students, because that really sets the tone to say not only monolinguals are going to have this issue. I mean, this is a common issue to all kids of whether monolingual or more. So I'm going to ask if there are any more questions, because you've been on the go for more than an hour. And I would like to ask if there's any final question for Carmen. This will be the moment.
Yo tengo una pregunta, la voy a hacer en español, ¿no? Porque estamos con la traducción y pues los que no entienden español también les pueden traducir al inglés. Carmen, ahora, ¿en qué proyecto estás trabajando? ¿De qué línea de investigación estás desarrollando en este momento?
La que me tiene más ocupada, bueno, mira, acabamos de acabar un libro que estamos muy contentas con mi colega Elsa Tragán, donde seguimos a niños desde los 6 años hasta los 16, los mismos niños, 10 años. Y ha sido un trabajo maravilloso, que hemos aprendido muchísimo, porque eran niños que les hacíamos los test en inglés, pero los entrevistábamos ya desde que tenían 6 años y los volvimos a entrevistar cada año hasta primero de la ESO y después en cuarto de la ESO los 16 años. Y claro, ya nos conocían de tantos años y eran muy sinceros y nos hablaban de los profesores, nos hablaban de todo. Y verles crecer y cómo algunos han tenido éxito aprendiendo lenguas y qué factores tenían, qué tipo de familia tenían, qué nos decían cuando tenían 6 años, 7 años, qué nos dicen cuando son adolescentes. Ha sido una experiencia única y esto lo hemos acabado ahora, hace poco. Y entonces lo que hacemos con el proyecto que tenemos del Ministerio ahora, estamos trabajando con subtítulos para ver el aprendizaje incidental, sobre todo, como decía, de fuera de la escuela, cómo se aprende gracias a ver la televisión en inglés o en español o en la lengua. Estamos haciendo estudios de vocabulario con diferentes tipos de subtítulos. Ahora estamos haciendo un estudio con subtítulos duales, en inglés y en español, los dos monolingües en ambos lados y estamos comparando. Y esto es en esto estoy trabajando estos días.
Bueno, ese libro entonces habrá que presentarlo en el futuro, ¿no?
Pues,
Ya te hago la invitación, ahora luego ya habrá que ver, ¿no? Cómo se
me sabe mal que es en inglés.
el libro está publicado únicamente en inglés, no en
No,
español.
no está publicado todavía, pero está escrito en inglés, sí.
Bueno,
Y es una pena, ¿no? Necesitamos un buen traductor que nos lo traduzca rápido.
bueno, pues eso ya se andará, como se dice.
Yo quería hacer un último comentario porque yo creo que muchas personas quizás no saben esto, pero es muy difícil y muy raro hacer estudios longitudinales. O sea, muchas veces piensan en un estudio longitudinal, a veces dicen que es 2 semestres. Y lo que nos se presenta, Carmen, constantemente es que son unos estudios de 10 años. O sea, esto es maravilloso y esto es lo que realmente informa lo que sería la adquisición de segundas lenguas, ¿no? O sea, que por eso os digo que Carmen es toda una es una investigadora impresionante porque hay que hacer eso.
Tenemos un grupo de investigación son todos muy buena gente y muy interesados por la investigación y por ayudar si podemos con nuestros resultados, que
Claro.
es más indirectamente posible, pero no trabajo sola no habría hecho todo esto. Estar 10 años siguiendo niños, yo sola, me hubiera gustado más.
Bueno, en
Muy
todo
bien.
caso, muchísimas gracias a las dos, Carmen y Idoia, ha sido fantástico. Y tenemos también la suerte con la tecnología, ¿no? De que todo está grabado y en el canal de YouTube del Instituto Cervantes de Leeds y de Manchester lo pueden volver a ver, lo pueden compartir y bueno, ese es el objetivo, ¿no? Compartir conocimiento y experiencias y llevar la ciencia a la población general, ¿no? Esa relación entre la academia y el ciudadano medio que es tan importante. Así que muchísimas gracias a las dos y espero que todos hemos disfrutado muchísimo.
Muchas gracias, Carmen.
Muchas
Y Pedro.
gracias. Hasta luego.